The first sound was a tiny gasp. Dr. Richard Adeyemi's heart stopped for half a second as Sophie lifted one small foot from the hospital floor. For 7 years Sophie had sat in a stroller, watched other children run and never had anyone hear the word walk from her. The corridor fell silent. Nurses who had stared at thick charts for months forgot the color of their pens. A homeless boy stood barefoot on the linoleum, eyes bright, hands steady. He had said, "Let me try," and, foot after trembling foot, she moved toward him. Marianne pressed her palms together until the knuckles whitened. Richard felt a mix of joy and fear so raw it hurt. People who had said Sophie could never walk covered their mouths. The wheelchair by the wall waited like an old promise. The homeless boy smiled as if he expected nothing and everything at once. The moment grew quiet. Then the scene cut away as if someone had switched a camera. 7 months earlier, the same hospital smelled of antiseptic and tired coffee. Richard sat in his office in Ikoyi, Lagos, hands folded, looking at a photo of Sophie on the desk. The photo showed her in a blue dress, hair in 2 neat plaits. She was 7, eyes searching the world even if her legs stayed still. Richard was a respected surgeon at Lagos Central Hospital. He had saved bodies and run long hours. Money came and went like tides, but nothing he did could move Sophie's feet. He had tried surgery, therapy, drugs, and special machines. Each time Sophie grew slightly stronger then paused. The pause stayed. Outside the city never slept. Traders shouted at dawn in Balagan Market, and traffic hummed like a constant drum. Marianne taught at a private school and kept the house full of light and stories. She believed Sophie's world could widen with love and care. Richard believed in skill and order. They argued softly at night about the best path forward. Love sat between them, steady but tired. One rainy afternoon, a small boy came to the hospital gates. He had no shoes and a jacket too large for his thin shoulders. He said his name was Evan. People saw him and thought of an orphan or a thief. He wandered the wards, offering to wash dishes or fold gowns for a bowl of rice. The cleaners liked him. He knew the staff's names. He hummed songs that sounded like lullabies and stood still in corners as if listening to something only he could hear. Evan's hands were clever. He braided discarded wires into shapes and massaged old patients' hands with a skill that made them sigh. A junior nurse once watched him work on a man who had trouble moving his fingers. The man gripped Evan's small hand and wept. "He knows how to make the pain sleep," the nurse said. That night, Richard locked the office late, the rain making rivers down the windows. He did not know a barefoot child would change everything. He did not know Sophie would stand in a hospital corridor and surprise a whole town. He did not know the next sound would be a shout, joy and fear, and that it would change the quiet lives gathered there. The night the rain stopped, Lagos smelled of wet dust and fried plantain from the street stalls. Richard stepped out of the hospital gate, umbrella folded, and saw the boy again. Evan sat on a low wall near the car park, jacket damp and eyes shining like tiny lanterns. "You're still here?" Richard asked, surprised. Evan nodded. "I came to see the girl who cannot walk." Richard's chest tightened. "Who told you about my daughter?" "No one," Evan said quietly. "I heard the nurses talk. I can help her." Richard frowned. A child barely 4, claiming what the best surgeons in Lagos had failed to do? He almost turned away. But something in the boy's calm gaze held him. It was not arrogance. It was certainty. Inside the hospital lobby, Marianne was waiting. Her blue scarf was damp, her eyes tired from a day of teaching. Evan walked in behind Richard without invitation. Marianne looked at the boy, puzzled. "Who is this?" she asked. "This is Evan," Richard said slowly. "He says he can help Sophie." Marianne blinked. "Help? He's a child." Evan stepped closer, small hands folded. "My mother was a nurse," he explained. "She taught me before she went away. She learned special ways from a great doctor in China. We used music and touch to wake sleeping legs." His voice did not shake. Marianne's heart softened. Richard noticed the mud on Evan's bare feet and the shiver he tried to hide. Against reason, he said, "Come upstairs." Sophie was in her room at the pediatric wing, drawing with wax crayons. She looked up as they entered, her dark eyes bright. "Daddy," she said, holding up a picture of the sea. Richard introduced Evan. Sophie studied the boy who smelled of rain and smoke. "Hello," she said softly. Evan crouched beside her wheelchair. "May I touch your feet?" he asked. Marianne hesitated. Richard's medical mind screamed no. Yet he heard himself say, "Go on. Just be gentle." Evan placed his small hands on Sophie's ankles. He began to hum, low and steady, a tune like an old Yoruba lullaby. His thumbs moved in tiny circles, pressing points Richard did not recognize. Sophie giggled, a sound like bells. Richard watched, caught between disbelief and awe. The boy's fingers seemed to know a secret language of nerves and muscles. Sophie's toes twitched. Not a spasm, something deliberate. Marianne covered her mouth. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Sophie gasped and stared at her own foot as if it belonged to someone else. Before Richard could speak, the door swung open. Dr. Tund, the senior neurologist, entered with a folder. He stopped short. "What is going on here?" Tund's voice sliced through the room. He saw Evan and frowned. "Who is this child?" "Richard, this is against every hospital rule." Evan kept humming, his small face calm. Sophie's toes moved again, this time stronger. Tund stepped forward, anger rising. "Stop this at once." Richard's heart pounded. He could end it now or let the miracle continue. The room held its breath, waiting for his choice. Richard stood frozen, his surgeon's mind torn between logic and the trembling movement in his daughter's toes. Tund's glare burned like a warning. "Richard," Tund said sharply, "this is a hospital, not a playground. Remove that boy immediately." Marianne clutched Sophie's shoulder. Her voice was low but firm. "Wait. Look at her foot." Tund turned, ready to argue, but his words died. Sophie's right toes curled, slow and deliberate. For years, therapy sessions had ended in silence. Now, under a homeless boy's touch, her muscles obeyed. Richard swallowed. "Tund, just give him a minute." Tund's frown deepened, yet he stepped back. Evan continued humming, the soft Yoruba lullaby weaving through the beeping machines. His small thumbs pressed patterns, ankle, heel, calf, each movement sure and gentle. Sophie gasped. "Daddy, it tickles." Marianne's eyes filled with sudden tears. Evan whispered, "Laugh if you like. Your legs need to wake up." Tund shifted uneasily. "This could be coincidence," he muttered. But even he leaned closer, unable to look away. After several minutes, Evan released Sophie's feet. He looked up at Richard. "She needs to rest now. Tomorrow we try again." Marianne knelt beside Sophie's chair, brushing her daughter's hair back. "How do you know all this?" she asked. Evan's gaze dropped. "My mother was a nurse. Before she died, she taught me. We lived in Enugu. She said music and touch can speak to the body when words cannot. A doctor from China, Dr. Chin, taught her." His voice trembled slightly on the last sentence as if the memory hurt. Richard's throat tightened. "And where is your father?" "I don't know him," Evan replied simply. "Mama and we stayed in a clinic where she worked. When she got sick, she told me to keep helping people." Silence settled. Outside, a night guard's whistle floated through the hallway. Tund cleared his throat. "This story is touching," he said, trying to sound firm, "but therapy requires proof. You can't just let a child handle a patient." Marianne stood, her voice steady. "If you have a better idea, Tund, show us. Otherwise, look at what just happened." Tund pressed his lips together, unwilling to concede. "I will report this to the board," he said finally, and left with a sharp click of the door. Richard exhaled slowly. The tension in the room eased like a held breath released. Evan reached for Sophie's hand. "Don't be afraid. Your legs want to move. Tomorrow we will sing again." Sophie's small fingers wrapped around his. "Promise?" "I promise," Evan said. Later that night, as rain returned in soft drizzles against the hospital windows, Richard and Marianne sat in the quiet waiting area. "This boy," Marianne whispered, "he could be a gift we never expected." Richard stared at the dark sky. "Or a mystery we cannot explain." From the children's ward came a faint sound, Evan's humming low and steady. And from Sophie's room a sudden giggle. Richard felt a shiver of hope he hadn't allowed himself in years, just as a sharp knock rattled the waiting room door. Someone had come, and the night's fragile calm was about to break. The knock echoed through the quiet hospital corridor. Richard rose quickly, heart thudding. Marianne followed, her scarf slipping from one shoulder. When he opened the door, a tall woman stood beneath the flickering hallway light. Her umbrella dripped rain onto the tiled floor. "Richard," she said, her voice low and careful. Marianne stiffened. Richard's breath caught. "Helen?" The woman nodded, eyes glistening. "Helen, Sophie's mother who had left when their daughter was barely 2. "I heard about Sophie," Helen said. "I need to see her." Marianne stepped closer, protective. "Why now?" Helen flinched at the sharpness. "I was wrong to leave. I thought I couldn't handle it, her illness, the endless therapy. I thought she deserved stronger parents. I see now. I was a coward." Richard's chest tightened with old pain. Before he could speak, a soft giggle drifted from Sophie's room. Helen turned toward the sound, her eyes wet. Inside, Evan sat cross-legged by Sophie's bed, humming his quiet lullaby. Sophie clapped along, her small feet resting lightly on the mattress. Helen froze at the sight. "Who is that boy?" she whispered. Richard's voice was measured. "Evan. He seems to be helping her." Helen's brows drew together. "Helping? How?" Marianne folded her arms. "You would not believe it unless you saw it." Helen took a slow step forward. "Then let me see." They entered Sophie's room. Evan looked up, still humming. Sophie's face lit with pride. "Mummy," she cried. Helen covered her mouth. "She remembers me?" Sophie nodded eagerly. "Daddy shows me pictures." Tears spilled down Helen's cheeks. She knelt beside the bed, stroking Sophie's hair. "I'm so sorry, my darling." Evan's gaze flicked between mother and child. He said nothing, only watched. After a long silence, Helen looked at the boy. "And you help her?" Evan nodded. "I want her legs to wake up." Helen's eyes narrowed, not with anger but with a mother's fear. "Are you trained?" Richard answered before Evan could. His mother was a nurse. She learned special methods from a Chinese specialist. Evan learned from her. Helen searched Richard's face. "And you believe this?" Richard glanced at Sophie's feet. "I believe what I saw." Helen swallowed her questions, but doubt lingered. The next morning, hospital gossip traveled fast. Nurses whispered in corridors, and even the janitor lingered near Sophie's door. Tund arrived early, carrying a stiff expression and a file of notes. "I have reported this to the board," he said to Richard. "They demand a demonstration if this boy is to continue." Marianne's jaw tightened. "You speak as if he's a trick." Tund ignored her. "This afternoon. The board will watch." Word spread like harmattan fire. By midday, the hospital conference room was packed. Doctors, nurses, even curious patients. Richard wheeled Sophie inside. Helen walked beside her, silent and uneasy. Evan followed with his calm, steady steps. Tund addressed the crowd. "We will see if this supposed therapy is real." Evan stepped forward without fear. He placed his hands gently on Sophie's ankles and began to hum. The room hushed. For a long moment, nothing happened. Tund's lips curled, ready to speak. Then Sophie's left foot shifted. Once, twice, stronger than before. A ripple of gasps spread through the room. Helen gripped the chair back, eyes wide. Richard's heart hammered. Sophie looked at Evan and whispered, "Can I try to stand?" The room went silent. Evan nodded. "Yes. Now." Every eye followed Sophie as she pushed against the armrests. Her knees trembled. The air thickened, waiting for the impossible. A sharp gasp swept across the conference room. Sophie's small hands tightened on the armrests as she lifted herself, knees wobbling like a newborn calf. The squeak of the wheelchair brakes echoed like a drumbeat in the silence. Richard felt his throat close. Marianne gripped his arm until her knuckles turned white. Helen covered her mouth, eyes wet and wide. Evan kept his palms lightly on Sophie's ankles. His humming rose, slow and steady, a gentle call to her sleeping muscles. Sophie's feet found the cold tile. For a breathless second she stood, trembling. Then, one step. A cautious, halting step. Another. The crowd gasped louder. Marianne sobbed openly. Richard's chest ached as if someone had pressed a fist against his heart. He took a small step forward, ready to catch her if she fell. But Sophie's face lit with a joy no one in the room would forget. "Daddy," she whispered. "I'm walking." Helen fell to her knees, tears streaming. "My baby." Even Tund, who had been standing stiff with folded arms, lowered them slowly. His eyes softened. Evan's humming faded into silence. He stepped back as if nothing unusual had happened. "She must rest now," he said simply. Richard knelt and wrapped Sophie in his arms, feeling the warmth of her small body pressed against his. He met Evan's eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Evan gave a shy smile. "My mother taught me that love wakes the body." Sophie only needed to hear it. The board members, struck dumb moments ago, now spoke in hurried voices. One elderly doctor cleared his throat. "Remarkable, truly remarkable." Tund finally exhaled. I was wrong," he admitted. "Whatever this is, it works." Helen turned to Evan, her voice unsteady. "I judged you before I even knew you." "I'm sorry, child." Evan shrugged gently. "You were only afraid for her." Later, after the crowd thinned and night spread its quiet over Lagos, Richard invited Evan to his office. Marianne and Helen sat nearby, Sophie asleep on a couch with a blanket pulled to her chin. "Evan," Richard said softly, "where do you live?" Evan lowered his eyes. "Nowhere. Since Mama died, I sleep where people let me." Helen reached for his hand. "No child should live that way." Marianne's voice broke the silence. "Then he won't anymore." She looked at Richard. "He stays with us." Richard nodded without hesitation. "You belong with family, Evan. From today you are ours." Evan's eyes widened, a spark of disbelief crossing his small face. "Yours?" Helen smiled through tears. "Ours?" For the first time, Evan's composure slipped. He threw his arms around Richard's waist. Richard held him close, feeling the heartbeat of the boy who had brought a miracle. Outside, the city hummed with distant traffic and the scent of roasted corn. Inside, a quiet promise settled like warm light. Sophie would walk again and Evan would never face the night alone. None of them knew that the world would soon hear of the boy healer from Lagos, or that Sophie's first steps were only the beginning of a much greater journey. Months later, Lagos Central Hospital still carried the echo of that day when Sophie first stood. Nurses retold the story like a favorite folktale. People came from far neighborhoods, Surulere, Yaba, even as far as Ibadan, just to glimpse the little girl who had once been told she would never walk. Evan stayed with the Adeyemi family as though he had always belonged. He had a room of his own now, small but bright, with the scent of freshly painted walls and a window that caught the morning sun. At night, he still hummed the lullabies his mother had taught him, the sound floating down the hallway like a gentle wind. Sophie's strength grew each week. She moved from taking slow steps with support to walking across the sitting room on her own. Richard watched every milestone with quiet awe. Marianne kept a journal of each new achievement. Sophie walked from the front door to the garden today, her handwriting neat and hopeful. Helen, once the stranger who had left, returned often. At first, she stayed at a careful distance, her guilt heavy. But Sophie, with a child's forgiving heart, reached for her mother without hesitation. Slowly, Helen began to help with Sophie's therapy sessions. The bitterness that once clouded her eyes softened. Tund, the skeptical doctor, became one of Evan's loudest supporters. He arranged meetings with medical researchers and insisted that Evan's techniques be studied properly. "This boy," Tund told a packed conference, "has changed what we thought possible in pediatric therapy." Soon, a letter arrived with a red seal. It came from China, from Dr. Chin, the very expert who had trained Evan's mother. The letter spoke of a scholarship for advanced neurorehabilitation training. Richard read it aloud while Evan listened wide-eyed. "They want me to learn more?" Evan whispered. "Yes," Richard said, smiling. "They want to teach you everything your mother began." Evan looked at Marianne, then at Sophie. "But I cannot leave you." Sophie held his hand. "You'll come back," she said simply. Richard knelt beside him. "Your mother gave you a gift. Go and grow it. We will always be your family." Tears blurred Evan's eyes, but he nodded. "Then I will go. For Mama. For Sophie." Years passed. Lagos changed, but the memory of that first miracle never faded. Evan returned from China taller, confident, carrying new skills and a quiet wisdom beyond his years. By the time he turned 16, he became the youngest licensed physical therapist in the country. Some said in the entire United States, where he later trained. Sophie, once bound to a wheelchair, now raced through the hospital garden in bright sneakers. She loved science and spoke often of becoming a pediatrician. "I want to help children the way Evan helped me," she said. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the Lagos skyline, Evan and Sophie stood side by side on the hospital roof. The city lights flickered like stars below. "You gave me back my legs," Sophie said softly. "And you gave me a family," Evan replied. They watched the night deepen, two lives forever linked by a single moment of courage. A homeless boy's quiet promise and a girl's first trembling steps.